What if the pain you feel today is not even yours? What if the way you love, fear, people please, chase, withdraw, or sabotage is not a conscious choice, but an unconscious echo of your very first bond? The truth is unsettling. Most of us are living out a wound we never asked for, and we're doing it quietly, gracefully, even successfully. But somewhere underneath the performance of adulthood, something aches, something we can't explain, something old. This is not the kind of pain that shouts. It whispers. It moves in silence beneath the roles you play and the masks you wear. You feel it when your boundaries collapse in relationships. You feel it when you long to be seen but fear being abandoned. You feel it when you give more than you have, hoping it will finally be enough to be loved without conditions. This wound has a name. But before it had a name, it had a shape. It had a mother. The first chain is not forged in violence. It is forged in need. It is created in the moments you reached out for comfort and met confusion, when your innocence collided with her exhaustion, when your hunger for presence met her absence, physical, emotional, or both. That moment, repeated again and again in infancy and childhood, did not just hurt. It organizes your nervous system. It built your relational template. It became the architecture of your self-worth. And yet this wound is not about blame. It is not a judgment of your mother. It is the recognition of how energy passes between generations. Carl Jung called it the unconscious inheritance, a psychic field passed down before words, before memory. The mother is not just a person. She is the first world, the first rhythm your soul knew. And when that rhythm is broken, distorted, unpredictable, or fused with pain, your soul learns not how to thrive, but how to survive. So many of us are still surviving, in adult bodies, with childhood wounds, smiling, achieving, nurturing others. But inside, there is a hunger to be mothered, to be held without condition, to be understood without having to perform. And when that hunger goes unacknowledged, it doesn't go away. It just finds substitutes. Lovers, addictions, overgiving, withdrawal, control. This is the invisible chain. The first one. The one that no one told you you were wearing, because everyone else was wearing it too. But here is the quiet revolution. This chain is not eternal. What was once inherited can be healed. What was once fate can become freedom. To do that, we must go inward, not to shame, but to witness, not to blame, but to remember. The wound does not want revenge. It wants reunion, integration, wholeness. You are not broken. You are still trying to complete a bond that never got to finish its sacred rhythm. This is where the real healing begins. Are you ready to go back to where your first wound began? Have you ever wondered why you keep attracting the same kind of pain in different faces? Why, no matter how much you grow, heal, or distance yourself from your past, certain emotions always manage to find their way back to you. Not as memories, but as patterns. You may think you've left the past behind, but the psyche doesn't operate on timelines. It operates on symbols. And the mother, whether physically present or emotionally absent, is the first and most enduring symbol in your unconscious. She becomes the first mirror, not only of your worth, but of how safe it is to exist at all. In the quiet moments of your life, when you are rejected and can't understand why it hurts so much, when you give more than you receive and call it love, when you fear abandonment before anyone has even left, those moments are not random. They are echoes. They are the living residue of an archetypal imprint so deep, so formative, that it silently weaves the storyline of your adult relationships. And the tragedy is that you may think these reactions are your personality, You may say, "I'm just anxious," "I have trust issues," or "I fall too hard," without ever realizing that you're not just reacting to the present, you're re-experiencing an ancient wound disguised as modern life. Carl Jung taught that the unconscious does not forget. It does not bury what is unresolved. It repeats it, and not as punishment, but as an invitation. That's why the people who hurt you the most often feel so familiar. Why do the ones who leave resemble the ones who couldn't stay in your childhood? Why does the voice in your head that criticizes you sound strangely like the emotional tone of the home you were raised in? The psyche recreates what is unhealed, not because you are broken, but because your wholeness is calling you back. This is how the pattern hides. Not in grand events, but in daily choices. The smile you force when you're actually hurting. The silence you keep when your needs are not met. The loyalty you offer to those who remind you unconsciously of someone you once needed love from, but could never quite reach. The most dangerous patterns are not the ones you can see. They are the ones you explain away, the ones you normalize, the ones you say are just who I am. But are they? What if the love you crave is actually a longing for the safety you never felt? What if your inability to receive is not pride, but protection? What if your independence is actually hypervigilance in disguise? The child who had to monitor the emotional climate of the home becomes the adult who struggles to relax in love. The child who had to earn approval becomes the adult who overfunctions in every relationship. These are not flaws. They are survival strategies the psyche adopted long before you had words to describe them. But here is the turning point. Patterns only persist in the dark. And the moment you name the pattern, it begins to loosen its grip. Jung believed that healing begins the moment we bring the unconscious into consciousness. That means your freedom is not in rejecting the past, but in illuminating it. You don't break the pattern by fighting it. You break it by understanding it. And once you see it, you are no longer just the child of your story. You become its author. So I ask you again, what if the pain you keep repeating isn't yours to carry anymore? What if the pattern was never about punishment, but about return? A return to the moment where love first got tangled with fear and where your truest self was forced to become smaller just to survive. The pattern may have started in childhood, but the choice to end it begins with you. What if the very traits you admire in yourself were once just survival strategies for a wounded child? Think about that for a moment. Your independence, your empathy, your ability to read a room before anyone speaks. These aren't random strengths. They are echoes of who you had to become in the absence of what you needed most. In the therapy room, I have seen countless individuals cling to these qualities with pride, unaware that beneath their surface lies a quiet grief, the grief of a child who had to grow up too fast, who became the caretaker, the mediator, the rescuer, not because they chose to, but because love was never simple. It was a performance, a negotiation, a subtle calibration of self in exchange for a fleeting sense of safety. When Jung spoke of the complex, he wasn't just referring to painful memories. He was describing emotional patterns with their own gravity, unseen forces in the psyche that pull us back into familiar emotional terrain. The mother wound, once buried, becomes one of the most potent complexes. It shapes not only how we relate to others, but how we relate to ourselves. You don't just replay your mother's voice externally. You internalize it. You become it. The voice that once dismissed your feelings now lives within, disguised as your inner critic. The emotional silence you once endured becomes the reason you second-guess your right to speak. And perhaps most haunting of all, the inconsistency you once survived becomes the instability you unconsciously create. Real life offers countless mirrors for this repetition. The partner who leaves you emotionally starving, the boss who micromanages you into paralysis, the friend who takes but never reciprocates. Each interaction awakens the dormant complex, not because you are broken, but because the psyche is recursive. It brings back what was split off until you can look at it with new eyes, until you can say, "This is not who I am. This is who I became in response to pain." And in that moment, the chain weakens. The spell begins to break. But here lies the paradox. The very traits that once protected you can now prevent your healing. Hyper-independence becomes a fortress that love cannot penetrate. People-pleasing becomes a mask that smothers your authenticity. Self-sacrifice becomes a script that writes you out of your own life. The adult, still loyal to the child's survival code, continues to abandon themselves in subtle daily betrayals. Until something cracks, until a quiet voice inside whispers, "I don't want to live like this anymore." So the question becomes, who would you be if you no longer had to protect yourself from love? What choices would you make if you were not bound to the past? Jung believed that the soul does not seek perfection, it seeks wholeness, and wholeness demands that we reclaim the parts of us we once disowned to feel safe, the angry part, the needy part, the tender, soft, and unguarded part. Healing is not the eradication of what once was, it is the integration of what was exiled. When you begin to turn toward those parts with compassion instead of shame, the dream shifts. The cracked bowl is still cracked, but the water inside begins to reflect you fully. Face and body, past and present. The mirror no longer distorts, it reveals. And what it reveals is not brokenness, but the beginning of return. A return to the self that never stopped waiting to be seen. What if the reason you still feel invisible in your relationships is that the first person who was supposed to see you never truly did? So many adults walk around carrying a silent ache they can't name, a low hum of shame, self-doubt, or over-responsibility that follows them like a shadow. They second-guess their emotions, apologize for existing, or overextend themselves trying to earn love they believe must be proved. But this isn't random. It's not a personality flaw. It's the unhealed psychic imprint of the mother wound, a wound that didn't start with rejection, but with misattunement. You may not recall exact words or moments, but your nervous system does. It remembers who was emotionally available, who wasn't, who held your truth with reverence, and who looked away. These micro moments of neglect, dismissal, or emotional inversion get stored in the unconscious as beliefs about your worth, your lovability, and your place in the world. Carl Jung reminds us that the complex, a constellation of emotional memory, remains active until it is made conscious, and the mother complex is the earliest and deepest. You may think you've grown up and moved on, but when your inner child was shaped by a mother who couldn't meet your emotional needs, that child doesn't disappear. She simply hides behind coping strategies. She becomes the one who pleases everyone but herself, the one who never asks for too much, the one who overfunctions in relationships while feeling chronically unseen. She survives by adapting. She survives by silence. She survives by believing that maybe love is supposed to feel like longing. And this is the hidden danger. The child who had to betray herself in order to stay connected to her mother grows into an adult who unconsciously betrays herself to stay connected to others. She confuses caretaking with love. She calls emotional absence independence. She feels safest when she's small because the first image of love she ever knew was conditional. Jung would say this inner dynamic becomes a pattern, repeating not because you want to suffer, but because the psyche longs to heal. It recreates the wound in new costumes, new faces, new lovers, hoping this time for a different ending. So the question becomes, what parts of yourself are still negotiating for love in ways that echo your earliest bond? Where are you abandoning your truth to avoid abandonment by others? Who do you become when you're afraid of being too much? To heal the mother wound is not merely to forgive or understand your mother, it is to reparent the child who still believes she has to earn her place. It is to stand at the edge of the inner world, look that child in the eye, and say, "You don't have to shrink anymore." Because healing is not just about insight, it's about integration, about returning to the abandoned self with arms wide enough to hold all that was denied. And perhaps the most radical act of all is this: to stop waiting for the mother you never had and start becoming the guardian your soul always needed. Are you willing to do that? Can you become the mirror that reflects your wholeness back to yourself, even if no one ever did? Have you ever stopped to wonder why your deepest pain doesn't seem to come from what happened, but from what you came to believe about yourself because of it? It's not the absence of love that wounds us most. It's the quiet story that forms in its place. I wasn't enough. I was too much. I had to be perfect to be safe. These beliefs do not form from logic. They form from survival. And long after the wound has scabbed over, they continue to whisper like background static, shaping how you see yourself, how you love, how you grieve, and how you settle. You begin to walk through life not as you are, but as the child you once were, still searching the eyes of others for the reflection you never received. This is the great illusion the unhealed mother wound sustains, that your worth is negotiable, that love is earned, that your needs are a burden. Jung spoke of the complex as a cluster of unconscious associations formed around early pain, and the mother complex, more than any other, wraps itself around the soul like fog, blurring your vision. You may become high-achieving but emotionally starved, deeply caring but utterly self-forgetting, successful in appearance but empty in spirit. These contradictions are not personal failings, they are evidence of an inner division, a soul forced to split itself just to belong, and at some point that division becomes unbearable. Not because life becomes more painful, but because your tolerance for that pain begins to wear thin. The life you built around that wound starts to feel like a performance you can no longer sustain. The mask gets heavy. The applause goes silent. The roles begin to collapse, and in their place, silence arrives. Not the silence of defeat, but the silence of truth. A stillness that asks, what if none of this was ever about your worth? What if the way you were loved had nothing to do with how lovable you truly were? This question cracks the complex. It shakes the scaffolding of your inherited beliefs. And from that crack, light begins to pour through. Slowly, subtly, the inner world shifts. You stop measuring your value by the validation of others. You begin to sense that maybe, just maybe, the original story was wrong, that your essence was never the problem, that your sensitivity was not a flaw, that your need for love was not weakness. These realizations do not come as thunderclaps. They come like soft rain. They wash away the dust that covered your reflection, and for the first time, you see yourself not through the lens of a child begging to be seen, but through the eyes of the adult who has finally returned to reclaim their soul. Jung believed that healing is not about becoming someone new, but about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. So, I ask you now, not as a therapist, but as a fellow traveler, what if the story you've been living isn't yours? What if you are not broken, but buried? What if healing the mother wound is not about changing the past, but about retrieving the part of you that never deserved to be hurt in the first place? What if the pain you've spent your whole life avoiding is the very thing that carries the blueprint for your transformation? At a certain point in the healing process, a curious thing begins to happen. The same inner storms that once terrified you now call you inward with a strange sense of sacred familiarity. You no longer run from the ache in your chest. You listen to it. You no longer distract yourself from the sudden heaviness in your body. You descend into it. And what you begin to notice is that the terror you once felt wasn't just about the mother herself. It was about your own inner landscape being filled with emotional echoes you were too young to understand. Echoes that said, "You are only lovable when you're useful," or "Your feelings are a burden," or worse, "If you speak your truth, you will be abandoned." These beliefs aren't just psychological. They become mythic scripts, encoded in the nervous system, in the muscles, in the breath. You don't just think them, you live them. You embody them without even realizing it. This is where the dark night deepens. Because suddenly, it's not just about healing childhood wounds. It's about facing the spiritual identity you've unconsciously built around those wounds. You start to realize how many parts of your personality are actually adaptations. The humor that masks your pain, the hyper-independence that conceals your unmet need, the constant helping of others to avoid feeling helpless yourself. These aren't flaws. They were survival codes, but now they become outdated armor that weighs down the soul. Carl Jung called this moment the confrontation with the shadow. Not the evil or dangerous parts of you, but the disowned truths, the tenderness, the rage, the grief, the unmet longing, and above all, the immense capacity for self-love that was buried underneath decades of trying to earn what was never freely given. In this stage, many people feel like they are unraveling, and in a way, they are. But this unraveling is sacred. It is not the end of you. It is the end of who you became in order to be loved. It is the undoing of the false self, the falling apart of an identity built on appeasement, invisibility, and performance. And while this process can feel terrifying, what lies on the other side is not collapse. It is clarity. It is spaciousness. It is the first breath of authenticity you've ever taken, the kind that doesn't seek permission, the kind that knows you were never broken, you were responding to a broken atmosphere. Jung believed that healing is not about becoming good or fixed, but about becoming whole. And to become whole, you must reclaim the parts of you that were banished to survive. So I'll ask you, what part of yourself have you been exiling just to be acceptable? What emotions do you still apologize for? What dreams have you abandoned because they didn't fit the script your family handed you? You see, the mother wound is not simply about what she did or didn't do. It's about the version of yourself you created to survive her world, and now you are being called to step into your own. The dark night teaches you who you are by stripping away who you are not to punish you, but to purify you, so that when you rise again, you are no longer shaped by the tides of old pain, but by the current of something far deeper, truth. And that truth will not come wrapped in logic. It will come wrapped in a symbol, in sensation, in that quiet moment when you realize your suffering wasn't senseless, it was sacred preparation. But what do you become when the chain is broken? Who are you truly when you are no longer shaped by absence, no longer speaking in the language of survival? This is the question that begins to rise once the mother wound is no longer the lens through which you see your worth. In the space left behind, something sacred begins to bloom. At first, it may feel unfamiliar. After all, many people spend decades identifying with their pain, organizing their personality around what was missing. But healing is not the erasure of memory. It is the reorientation of identity. You stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and begin asking, "What is now possible because I see it clearly?" In Jungian psychology, this return to self is not a destination. It is an unfolding. The self, with a capital S, is the totality of who you are meant to be. Not just the ego, not just the inner child, not just the wounded parts or the adapted persona. It is all of it, held together in sacred coherence. It is your essence before the shaping, your truth before the conditioning. It is you who existed before your mother's pain reached across generations to touch you. And it is you who exists now, consciously deciding not to pass that pain any further. You see, there is a gift hidden inside the mother wound, though it often comes wrapped in sorrow. It is the invitation to awaken, to feel deeply, to choose differently. The pain may have entered through the mother, but the healing emerges from you. That alone is a sacred act of defiance in a lineage of silence. That alone is a revolution. This is not the kind of healing that earns applause. It is not dramatic. It is not always visible. It happens in the quiet moments when you choose to soothe yourself instead of criticizing, when you say no without guilt, when you finally tell your story without trembling, when you mother your own pain with the tenderness no one else ever offered. This is the quiet power of self-rescue, and it echoes back through generations, because when you heal, you do not heal alone. You begin to shift the psychic atmosphere for those who came before you and those who come after. You become the ancestor your lineage has been waiting for. Not the perfect one, but the conscious one. The one who chooses presence over repetition, compassion over silence, truth over legacy. Carl Jung taught that the greatest gift we can offer the world is to become ourselves fully. That is not a selfish act. It is a healing one, because a person who no longer lives in reaction to their pain becomes a sanctuary for others. A person who has held their own suffering with reverence can hold space for the suffering of the world without collapsing under it. And that, perhaps, is the truest definition of wisdom. So as we close this exploration, I ask you to pause. Feel into your body. Where does this message land in you? What parts of you stirred as you read? What parts resisted? What parts softened? That is where the chain begins to dissolve, not through grand declarations, but through the quiet choice to live your life from a place of integration, not reaction, from presence, not performance, from truth, not trauma. The journey is not linear. Some days you will feel strong. Other days, the past will echo louder than you expected, but now you have something you did not have before: awareness. And awareness, once awakened, cannot be undone. It is the light that guides you through the cave, the voice that whispers, "You are not your pain. You are the one who has survived it." This is where you begin. This is where you return to yourself. This is where you break the first invisible chain. If this touched something sacred inside you, don't let it fade into silence. Like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your presence here is not just support, it's resonance. And if you feel moved to give back, your donation becomes a quiet but powerful gesture that helps keep this light alive for others still walking in the dark.